Hey,
All right.
hey, man.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good, good. How you been?
Pretty good. It's been a pretty fun day, kind of jumping between all the .NET technologies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Dapper is really one of those interesting topics that I think a lot of our user base is going to get
Yeah, exactly.
a lot of benefits from seeing. So we're excited, very excited.
Yeah, Dapr should be pretty fun. There are no console applications though, so I apologize. But we're all gonna build some cool stuff, so hopefully people enjoy it.
Yeah. If you're ready, I'm going to share your screen, and then
Yeah,
Martin and I will disappear. We'll be here. If you need anything, just let us know.
All right, thank you, folks. Appreciate it. And so, hey, everybody. My name is Cecil Phillip. I'm a developer advocate at Stripe. And this is actually my first time speaking at a JetBrains event, so I got to make sure I do this more often. So I'm super happy to be here. What we're going to talk about today is Dapr, right? Which is like a framework that makes it a little bit easier for you to build microservices, regardless of whatever language you're talking about or tool set you're using or anything like that. And I'm a .NET guy, so I'm going to do it in .NET, right? Like we're going to see a bunch of .NET demos and all this types of stuff. But I got to tell you, I do have some slides. So we're going to go through a little bit of slides, not too many slides, but then we're going to dive into some code and we'll see some examples of how you could actually build a real application that uses Dapr. All right, so why don't we get started? So let's talk about what makes microservice development so challenging, or at least my opinion of why it's so challenging. Now, when you think about like that ecosystem, like there's just so many different options, right? And options are usually a good thing, right? There's open source options, there's options you can pay for. If you think about things that you want to do in your microservices, like you might say, hey, I want to do messaging, right? I want to be able to have traceability, right? And use something like OpenTelemetry. I want to do service discovery or have a state store or secret store. Again, like any of these different types of things that you can think about make up like a core tenet of a feature that you want to do in your microservice. Now, the thing with that now is that, well, for each of those things that you want to do, there's just so many different options, right? Like I'm sure any of you here that are watching now can name 2 or 3 or more message brokers, right? Like RabbitMQ or RocketMQ or ActiveMQ, Azure Service Bus, Amazon SQS, and so on and so on and so forth, right? And now as you're building these services, like now you're trying to pick these components that you're going to use to compose your application. Like there's a lot that you kind of have to think about, right? You have to think about, oh, well, does it run on, my operating system that I'm trying to build and deploy on? Does it work with like the programming languages that I want to use? Like, are they SDKs or not? Or is there like an HTTP thing that I could call, right? Like so many different things that you have to kind of consider. And with that, like I like to call that the microservice matrix, right? Depending on what you want to do and the more things you want to do, it just becomes a very complicated collection of things that you have to try and put together to solve your particular business problem, right? And obviously, the more time you spend doing that, it's going to be more time of your sprint. And, who has really time to spend like evaluating all those options just to find the one that works really right for you. And so for me, that's where Dapr kind of comes into play, right? It gives us an option of, creating like this runtime that we could use that abstracts some of those common practices and some of those common use cases that a lot of microservice developers kind of use, right? You think about, being able to add something to your application that's not going to add a lot of weight, but still it gives you the flexibility to kind of not think about so much the thing that it's implementing the feature, but more so the thing that you actually want to do, right? You spend more time, creating business value and less time fiddling with configuration and SDKs and NuGet packages and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so the way that Dapr does this is that it really, starts off with standards. Like what are some of the common standards we have in our industry, right? We think about things like using HTTP or AMQP for messaging protocols as we go back and forth. We think about using tools like OpenTelemetry that I could use with these different, telemetry and logging and metrics providers, right? I think about, needing to be able to be open source. I needed to be able to run with different languages. I needed to be able to run on different operating systems and runtimes, right? Like I need a truly open tool and framework that's going to allow me to create, the application that I want to build. So when we think about Dapr now, the way that it achieves this is based on this concept called building blocks. And what building blocks are essentially different sets of tasks or things that you might want to do inside of your microservice, right? And behind each building block is some type of implementation. So right now, these are a few of the building blocks that Dapper offers. So you think about things like, service to service communication, state store, publish, subscribe, observability secrets, like in all of these different types of things, right? But now, not only do we have like these different types of building blocks and things that we could put on top of our application, but we also have the ability to use them with any programming language that really speaks gRPC or HTTP, which, most of the languages that I use today can speak HTTP. If you're using a language that doesn't, well, talk to me. We can figure it out a little bit later, right? But again, if your application speaks HTTP or gRPC, then you can work with Dapper, right? And that's really the only requirement that you really have, right? What happens is that like over very well-defined API endpoints, you can make a call to a service, make a call to Dapper, and you could say, hey, Dapper, I want you to publish this message for me. Or, hey, I want you to drop this thing in the state store, or I want you to, give me the secrets, wherever the secrets happen to be stored. And my application really doesn't need to think about it, right? Like I don't need to know like what's the backing store, what's the thing that's behind, that's implementing that. I just need to know, okay, hey, you're gonna do this job for me. I'm gonna delegate to you and you'll figure it out. And then I could keep on doing what I'm doing, right? Like processing orders or, filing insurance claims or, I don't know, drop the dot for Cali, whatever it is that we want to do, right? Like we can go ahead and like start processing like these types of workflows. Cool thing about that too. So not only does it work with different programming languages, that it works, across different hosts. So you could run Dapper anywhere. I'm going to be running it here on my machine locally, right? But if you're running in the cloud, right, you could put it on, GCP, Azure, AWS. You can run it inside of a virtual machine. Pretty much any way that you can run your code today, you should be able to run Dapper. Okay, now let's kind of talk about the components, right? So we spoke about those building blocks. Behind the building blocks has to be the thing that actually implements the building block, right? So the building block is just an abstraction. It's just here's a feature that we offer, right? But behind of that, somebody or something has to actually implement that feature. So again, if we think about like state storage or even pub sub, and we're going to see some examples of those, if it's an abstraction, like where's the thing actually being stored? Like where's the message actually being published to, right? And again, like I said before earlier today, like we have that microservice matrix, right? Like we have tons of different options that are available for us to choose from. But again, because I don't want to think about it, I'm going to kind of delegate that to Dapper, and Dapper will figure it out. So if you look inside of the Dapper repo inside of GitHub, and you'll notice that there's a components contrib repository, and inside it, like there's tons of different community and also corporations and different types of folks that have contributed like different components, right? So as you can see here, we have support for things like Azure Cosmos DB and DynamoDB and Service Bus and Key Vault and Prometheus and Grafana and all kinds of stuff, right? Like more things that I even know what they are, to be honest with you. But like there's just so many different options for you to choose. But again, the important part is, again, where your app stands and when it talks to Dapper, it doesn't really need to think about those things, right? That's not something that it really needs to be that concerned about. So, okay, so we have the building blocks, and then we have the components that implement those different building block features. So how exactly does that get into Dapper, and how does my application actually get access to that? Like, how do I actually start working with it? So if you think about how Dapper works today, right? Dapper essentially is an executable, right? It's a little tiny executable. And what you'll do is as you deploy it, you'll have one instance of it for every instance of your application, right? And that's a very common pattern you might see with folks that are building microservices called the sidecar pattern, right? So if I'm building a web API, I'm going to have an instance of Dapper right next to my web API. Yeah, if I have a background service that's processing work, I'm going to have an instance of Dapper sitting next to that. If I have 10 instances of any one of those, I'm going to have 10 instances of Dapper. Because again, the whole goal is for it to ride side by side with your process, right? And then now as your application needs resources, well, it could just ask Dapper for it. So if you take a look at like this diagram that I'm showing you right now, you can see that I have service A and then there's a service B, right? If service A wants to communicate to service B, what would we usually have to do, right? I'd query DNS records, I'd have hard-coded configuration somewhere, maybe I'd have some service discovery thing like console or something like that, or etcd, but I might have to query and be like, hey, tell me where this stuff is. And then even with that, right, like even if I figure out, okay, I have some hard-coded configuration, How do I know if it's healthy? How do I know it's up? How do I know that the address didn't change? Right? Like things happen inside of our applications. We have to be able to deal with all these types of things. Well, luckily, if you're using Dapper, well, I don't really need to think about that anymore. At least not from an application perspective. Like Dapper is going to figure that out for us. So if service A makes a call to Dapper, right, or its instance of Dapper, then it's going to be able to know, well, what are all the different components that have been configured for those different building blocks? And what are the other instances of Dapper that are inside of the machine, right? So again, as you stand it up in your infrastructure, for every instance that you have, every instance of Dapper knows about, well, all the other instances of Dapper, right? And they kind of form like a little bit of a web, right? They all kind of form like this mesh. And so now, again, as I communicate with one or many instances of different services and components, I don't have to know about like the address or where they're located or anything of that sort. Like Dapper will just go ahead and it'll figure it out for me. So that works out pretty cool. So here's a quick example of what it looks like. Again, so I have my application. Now, when it comes to actually deploying your app and your Dapper sidecar usually exist within the same space. So when I say the same space, your app should be able to speak to Dapper on localhost, right? They need to be able to know where each other's ports are. So, your app has to be able to see Dapper on localhost, and Dapper has to be able to see your application on localhost as well, so they can communicate. And now what happens is that there's going to be, again, this gRPC or HTTP channel is going to be open for the communication to go back and forth between your app and Dapper, right? So you could know, okay, well, this is the app and it's here. And then your app could be like, hey, I want to send requests to you for you to do some different things. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about these building blocks, right? So we saw the sidecar model. We talked about like the architecture and how that stuff kind of works a little bit. Let's actually look at one of these building blocks or a couple of them and then see, well, what does it actually look like to use Dapper, right? So here's a service invocation one. Now, when we think about service invocation, you think about something like service discovery, right? I have a multitude of services, like each of them doing like a different task, right? How do I know where they are? How do I find them? How do I call them? What's the endpoint, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Well, like I said before, for every instance of your app, you have an instance of Dapper. So now whenever I make a request, again, my app is making a request to service A. What I'll do is, hey, I don't know where service A is, but I'm going to hit Dapper, right? And Dapper uses this thing called multicast DNS. If it's running, on your infrastructure or on my own laptop, right? It's going to use this thing called multicast DNS for service discovery, right? It's going to be able to discover the other Dapper instances. And it's going to say, hey, does anyone know where service A is? And the other one's going to be like, me, like that's mine, I have it. And now I'm going to be able to forward that request, or Dapper is going to be able to forward that request for you and then send it back after like service A has processed that response, right? And again, like my app doesn't need to know anything about that. Now, one of the important parts I want you to see here is that if you take a look at the URL that's at the bottom, right, Dapper provides well-defined API endpoints for all of its different services. So for instance, if I wanted to invoke a method, right, on service A, it'll be invoke. You notice I have the name of the app. It says service A /method. And then the end of it, I have something called new order, right? And if you look on the right side, you can see like the endpoint is going to, attach to, right? It's going to hit that /new order endpoints on the other side. Now, a lot of .NET developers might be like, well, what if I have an /API/something? Well, that's fine, right? It's just a path. All you do is just append your path to the end of that, that template. So it'll be service A /method /API/ drop the dot, right? Like /something. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to translate it over and it's going to hit that service, right? One thing that's cool, depending on the environment that you're running in, and this is actually a new feature. I think this one came out in like Dapper 1.7, maybe 1.8. It has this thing called pluggable name resolution. And this comes in really handy when, hey, I want to be able to talk to services that don't live in my space, right? It lives in a different cluster somewhere, or it lives outside of my environment, right? What we can do is be able to use things like HashiCorp console, if folks are familiar with that, to be able to say, hey, I want to request this service. Let me know where it is, right? And then, for any service that's registered in it, whether it's inside of your infrastructure or not, as long as Dapper can speak to that instance of console, or again, whatever other thing you're using for service discovery, it's able to again, kind of poke its head out and go to that other world and come back and deal with the responses from that particular request, right? Let's talk about another building block. I promise we're gonna get to demo soon. I promise, but slides are good sometimes. So when you think about pub sub, right? You think about, hey, I have a lot of different things that are in my system, and I want to be able to publish a message to a queue or to a broker. I want to be able to have like some asynchronous communication, right? I don't want to do a request response. I want to drop a message in a queue and walk away, and then I'm going to have like a series of workers or subscribers being able to like, respond to those messages, pull them off the queue and process them whenever they have the bandwidth to do so. Right, so that's what we think about when we do pub sub, right? Well, Dapper supports, again, pluggable pub sub. And just like with the service invocation, it has a very well-defined URL that you could use. This time, I'm going to hit the /publish, and then I'll have /orders/processed. Now, /orders, like in that position inside of the URL, is going to represent like the pub sub. Like what's the place that I want to send it to? Like what's the pub sub service that I've registered? And then process is going to be the name of the topic or queue that I want to send the message to, right? So if you kind of read the URL, I want to publish to the orders topic. I want to publish to the orders broker inside of the process queue, right? That's kind of how it reads when you like look at the URL, right? And now on the other side, again, I can have one or more subscribers, again, all with their own instances of Dapper to be able to pull that out and start processing them. Now let's talk about like, what would this actually look like if we want to configure this? Well, I know how much y'all love YAML. So Dapper is configured using YAML. And so this is kind of what that configuration looks like. You can see here on the right side, I have a component named orders, and I'm looking at the Dapper spec, and this one is saying, hey, I want to use pub sub using Redis, right? And then I just kind of give it some other information like, the connection string on the port, have the password. This one just happens to be pulling the password out of a secret store because there's support for secrets in Dapper as well. And now we're able to kind of go in and start processing some of that stuff. Okay. How about this? How about we pause here? And I'm going to switch over to JetBrains Writer. Why don't we take a look at some code, right? Because I know you all love code, right? So this is what the demo looks like, right? Right now I have an application running. It's just my events listing app, right? So inside of my events listing app, what I want to do is, well, I want to pick somewhere to go. Right, so let's say we're going to go to, I don't know, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Let's go to the night market, right? So inside of my night market, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hit tickets. Right, I'm going to fill out some information. This just happens to be using Stripe checkout, right? But the important part I want you to see here, I'm going to put in some dummy information. Oh, that's not a real phone number, Cecil. Oh, that's a real phone number. And I'm going to just put in some fake information in here. There we go. There we go. There we go. Me. And there we go. Right? Now, what I'm doing here is that I have this application, and what it's doing is that I'm saying, okay, I want you to process this order. But then what happens, what Stripe does is that it's going to send you back a webhook event. And now my webhook event, when it comes in, I want to look at that event. I want to drop it into a queue. So like now I'll process that. I've sent off a message somewhere in the backend, and Dapper is going to go ahead and process that queue message for me, right? So why don't we take a look at JetBrains Writer really quick? I can show you what some of this stuff kind of looks like. All right, so this is Writer. The first thing that I want to show you is, let's show you how to actually run some of these Dapper things. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to switch this to the file system one. I'm sorry, I'm not like, crazy with like the keystrokes and stuff like that, but I'm just want to show you what this is looking like super quick as it's running on my machine. So what I'm using here is a Docker compose file, right? You don't have to use a Docker compose file. It is not a requirement for Dapper, but it just makes it easier for me to run things locally. It's like a little bit, more flexible than me just running a bunch of console apps, but it's also a lot less complicated than me like spinning up an entire Kubernetes cluster to like run all these nodes and stuff like that. But it's also a good example you can see here. You could run it locally on your machine, and you don't really have to set up a bunch of stuff to actually do it. Now, what I have here is I have a web app. So my web app is actually built with Blazor, and I'm using a web API in the backend. And I'm just pointing, hey, I want you to go out and build this container. Now, what you'll notice here too, I have my web app, and then right next to my web app, I have my Dapper Sidecar, right? And like I said before, my Dapper Sidecar is just a process. Well, let's talk about like some of these options that we're going to put inside of this Dapper Sidecar. Right here, I'm calling Dapr D, which is actually the name of the process that it's I'm going to run Dapr, right? Dapr D for the Dapper daemon, right? The app ID, which is the name of my application that I'm running. In this case, it's just called website. The port, my app is running on port 5276, and then some configuration for Dapr, right? Like, where do I go to find out like how to configure my stuff? But again, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, like for every app that you see in here, I'm going to have an instance of my Dapr sidecar. So here's a web app, here's a web app sidecar. Here's my order processor. Again, not super important what's happening inside of this file, other than the fact that I want you to see for every instance of this application, there's an instance of this Dapr sidecar, right? And here's my other one that's running here on this machine. Okay, great. Now, so you've seen how we set up Dapr. How do I actually use Dapr inside of my .NET application, right? Now let's head over and take a look at some code. Let's take a look first at the, let's see, which one we want to look at first? Let's take a look at the API server one first, right? And let's pop this open super quick. Super big font, because I was told I needed to make big fonts. Now, what you're noticing here, and I want us to focus on like this particular section of the code, right? What I'm doing is that like I'm creating a API client for Dapr, right? So I'm just using the HTTP client factory. And then I'm giving it the address of localhost. Because again, whenever we talk to Dapr, from every instance of your app, I just want to talk to it on the same network, right? I want to be on the same machine, right? And vice versa, right? Dapr is going to look for my app, my instance of my app, on the same host, right? And that's pretty much about it, right? Nothing else needs to happen, right? I'm just creating like my special instance of Dapr. Now, let's go and see where we actually process that. And I believe it's inside of, yes, I know, I'm going to learn the keyboard shortcuts. Don't get mad at me. Inside here, what you're going to see, let's move this around a little bit. If I head down to the, is this the webhook handler? Yeah, if we head down to the webhook handler, there's stuff happening here, there's code happening here. The only thing that's happening that's important for Dapr is this section of code that's right here, right? And all I'm saying is that, hey, I want to get that instance of Dapr, which again, you saw it just had that base address of localhost 3500. Nothing else special happening inside of here. I'm going to create some JSON things. I'm going to create the content, and then I'm going to call post async, right? But then notice the URL I'm sending it to, right? I'm sending it to slash, v1.0 publish, the name of the pub sub, then I'm getting from config, and order.fulfill is the name of the topic that I'm publishing to, right? And then if you can see here, again, I'm getting a lot of stuff from configuration, and I'm just sending it over like this JSON payload. What's inside of this JSON payload? Well, it's just, it's just an ID. I'm not sending anything over crazy inside of there. And it really doesn't matter what you send in here, but the fact of the matter is now I'm sending this stuff over to Dapr, and it's going to start processing that stuff for me, which is pretty cool. For folks that are going to ask this question, I know I always get this question. Yes, there are Dapr SDKs. You can totally use the SDKs if you want to do this instead of spinning up your own HTTP client. Again, works for tons of different languages. I like to do Dapr the hard way. I like to just call the raw endpoints and do it myself. Your mileage may vary. You might want to use the SDKs or not. Completely up to you. But if you want to use just raw HTTP client, now you can say, well, this is how you do it. All right. So this is one side. That's the publishing side, right? I've gone ahead and I've sent messages out to the to Dapr. Let's take a look at this other project, this order processor, right? And I believe the code is in this one, right? Let's take a look at, okay, so the slash fulfillment, right? Slash fulfillment is the part that I actually start processing those messages, right? And this part is a tiny little bit more involved, and let's talk about why that's the case. So first of all, you're going to see here, I'm going to get this thing called a cloud event. Now, Dapr by default uses cloud events, which is a CNCF specification for sending events back and forth throughout different protocols, right? So it works over HTTP, works over gRPC, works over AMQP. Again, standards-based, right? Dapr uses like cloud events for creating an envelope over your message, right? So I just sent over my ID as a JSON object, and now it's going to be sent in like the JSON data section and wrapped in like a message payload and sent over the wire. The reason Dapr does this is for a couple of reasons. One, it does it for, enable open telemetry and doing tracing. It also helps with routing as well, right? So what I'm doing here is like I'm using the Cloud Events SDK. Again, completely optional. You don't have to use it. This is not Dapr specific. Just makes it easier for me. And I'm going to say, hey, look at the request, and I want you to pull out that cloud event. And then inside of that cloud event, I'm just going to do some like basics, deserialization. and I'm going to go ahead and get like that raw data payload, right? And that raw data payload just has in that session ID that we sent over earlier from the front end, right? And there you go. Now you know how to use Dapr, right? Now, what I want to do is show you like some of these other features that it has. And actually, let me check my terminal real quick. Okay, I got to run a command real quick. I thought I was running this. I'm sorry. It's not running. Okay, I want to show you the open, the traceability support that you have in Dapr too, because I think that's something really interesting for folks. So a couple of times you heard me mention, hey, for every instance of your app or every instance of your service, you want to have an instance of Dapr, right? Now, one of the things that becomes challenging with microservices, again, now I have all of these different instances, and I want to be able to, maybe do like some end-to-end testing and follow, hey, well, if the request started here, like where did it end? Where did it go? Who did it call? Like what are all the different parts of my app that actually got touched, at least from like a network, transport perspective. And that's where OpenTelemetry comes from, right? Like it helps with things like, metrics and, logs and traces and stuff like that to help us find a way to like monitor like what's actually happening inside of our application. And as you probably guessed it, Dapr supports that. And I don't really have to do a lot of stuff to enable it. All I have to do is just say, hey, well, what's the thing that I want to send the metrics to? Like, what's the thing I want to send this telemetry to? And, out of the box, as you can see, it supports, anything that speaks OpenTelemetry, like Dapr could work with. So, Datadog, Zipkin, again, Prometheus, so on and so forth, right? But now this OpenTelemetry, support is not something that you really think about inside of your application code. It's something that Dapr just kind of deals with it for you. So instead of you having to like wire it up, like Dapr will deal with it. Now, yes, there is OpenTelemetry support in like .NET with like activities and stuff like that, and you could still do that, and that information will still flow through. Doesn't erase it. But if you do nothing, you're gonna get some stuff, and it's pretty cool. So I think that's interesting to see. Here's an example of what it looks like inside of, on the left, I think this is Zipkin. On the right side, this is what it would look like if you're using something like Azure Application Insights, right? You create this cool, I think they call it like an app map, right? So you can see how the information is flowing from one side of another. And you can see what folks are actually, where the data is actually going. So let's do this. I want to show you what this looks like. Let's run this application again super quick, only because I want to make sure I generate some, at least a trace or two. What do I need to put here? Email, right? Cecil Phillip at Yahoo. Right, we're gonna go to Yahoo. I want to use this Yahoo address for like fake stuff. Is that a real number? That's a real number. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna generate another request really quick. Now I should be able to see my, now that my events are being forwarded to my local machine, I should be able to see some of that information happening on my machine. Okay, now what I'm going to do is it done? Great, fantastic. Let's pop open the container situation inside of here. And what I want to do is look at the order processor, right? And here you can see here, and this is just, again, my container that's running. Now it's in here and it's listening to Dapper and like, just some different things are happening inside of here, right? Also, you can notice here on the left side, you can see like this is my actual Dapper container that's running. It's actually being able to like send messages to queue and like do all kinds of cool stuff. Okay, right, and then let me check and make sure this thing is still running. Is it still running? Yes, fantastic, great. So now if I wanted to kind of see what this looks like, I could open my browser and I have Zipkin running in that container Docker situation, and its port is there we go, 494.11, right? And if I there's no traces in there. Well, usually what happens when things work the way that they're supposed to look, I'll see something like this, right? I'll see like those different instances of my app inside of here running. And now I could be able to say, okay, well, that's really cool. Like that's how Dapper does stuff. Okay, so we talked really quickly about, this is what it looks like in .NET as I run it. And you can saw how I kind of configured things, at least to run inside of Docker Compose. Again, Docker Compose is not required. But where do I actually configure those Dapper components? Like I showed you a YAML example inside of one of the slides earlier. Let's go ahead and take a look at one of the folders I have in here. And inside of my folder, I have a couple of them. So here's an example. I'm using like RabbitMQ to send messages, and it's one of the components that I'm using. And so here's an example of how you can configure a Dapper component, right? And I'll be honest with you, don't tell anybody. I don't really know these things off the top of my head. I usually just go to the GitHub repo, copy it, and then just change the values and get it to work. Right. So if you're wondering about, oh, how am I going to know like all these YAML values that I have to set? Trust me, nobody does, right? Like all we do is like, let's just go to GitHub and we'll figure it out, and then we'll just like update the values that we need to update. So again, so as you can see here, I'm specifying a kind of component. The name of the bus is RabbitBus, right? And that's, you know, in my URL, if you saw the name of the bus that I had in configuration, like that's the name I'm using, right? And then here I'm just saying, okay, well, I want you to go to, you know, this instance of RabbitMQ that just happens to be running on my machine, right? And that's also being run inside of that Docker compose file. What would it look like if I wanted to do something different like Redis, right? Like I could do this too, right? Again, all this information is inside of the GitHub files. If you want to know how to configure these, honestly, I just go to GitHub or the documentation, copy, paste it, change the values, and then we're off to the races, right? Like everything's good to go. Now, one of the things that's different here that I want you to notice about this one is that it's using like this thing called a secret ref. Pretty much it's saying, hey, I don't want to write my Redis password inside of this, you know, this file. Instead, I want to go pull that password from somewhere else and then have, you know, my Dapper manifest files, right? Like just kind of populate them for me. And so again, I'm going to use that secret store building block that's a part of Dapper. And notice here, I'm using this one called local secrets, right? Local secrets is just another component, right? It's another building block that I configured. So I'm saying, hey, I want to configure this Redis pub/sub building block or pub/sub component. But in addition to that, I also want to make use of another one, right? I want to make use of the secret store because I don't want to like, you know, check in my secrets into GitHub and they're all in my YAML files. And everyone's like, what are you doing? Why is all your secrets on GitHub? Like, that's not a good thing to do, right? So this is how you're doing. So now your next question might be, well, how do I configure the secret store now? Glad you asked. So if we head over to this other file that's also in the repository, here I'm using what's called a local secret store. This is only for testing. Do not do it in production. But again, what I could do is like point to a local file, and then I could have it, you know, just use the settings in that file as my personal secrets, right? Usually what folks would do, you'd set up like your git ignore rules or whatever the case is. Make sure this doesn't get checked in. Or even you can even just make sure that it's just not in your, you know, in your folder and make it can be somewhere else on your hard drive. But then now you could use this. And then now when it's time for you to actually start pushing to production, you could just swap it and use something else, right? And that's a totally acceptable thing to do. Okay. And then the last piece of configuration I want to show you, there's a lot of configuration files, I know. This is what like some of the basic tracing configuration looks like. And here, what I'm doing is that I'm sending some data over to Zipkin, right? So here you can see, hey, I can set my sampling rate, I can set my endpoint address, and I can be like, this is where I want you to send that information, right? Like this is where that stuff is going to go. And then you can see how exactly all that works and all that gets wired up. Okay. All right, let's head back over to the slides super quick. All right, so we saw how that works. Now, what are some other things that I could do with Dapper that I think are really cool? So something I didn't show, but something that you can definitely do. Dapper has this concept of API scoping. So right now, again, for every instance of Dapper, there's an instance of your sidecar. And then by default, all of those APIs are just available to you by default. Obviously, some of them may be configured, some of them may not be, right? Because again, Dapper is very like pay for play. If you don't configure a state store, there's no state store. If you don't configure a pub sub, there's no pub sub. But when you call that API endpoint, right, you're still able to call it. You're just not going to get a response back. You're going to get back like an HTTP, you know, failure status code or something of the sort. So with API scoping now, what it does is go a little bit further. Now it says, hey, for these types of applications or these applications that I specified in my configuration file, I want to make you, I want to allow you or deny you to be able to access like these endpoints. So if I want to say, hey, I don't want my app to access state management, but it could do service invocation on pub sub, I could specify that, right? And again, when I say my app, I mean like my instance of my service. So you may have some services that can publish and some that can't. You may have some services that can do service discovery and some that can't. You see what I'm saying? Like you can completely configure and customize how exactly you want a lot of that stuff to work. You could lock it down as much as you want to, which I think is a pretty cool thing to do. The next thing I want you to check out is the fact that we have this thing called CADA. CADA is really cool. Also a CNCF project. I think CNCF stands for Cloud Native Cloud Computing Foundation. And it has this really cool feature that allows you to like auto scale your containers and your deployments if you're using Kubernetes, right? This is not like a Dapr thing, but it works really well with Dapr. So now I could say, hey, I have 100 items in my queue, maybe more than 100, but I have a bunch of stuff in my queue. I'm completely backed up. I need to spin up more instances of my app to be able to come in and process those. Then CADA will do that automatically for you. And you could specify that using like config rules and stuff like that. Dapper also has virtual actors, which is really cool. One of the things that folks always ask, like, hey, well, we have Orleans and we have Akka.net, like, and now there's another thing. Here comes another actor framework. Like, why should I use this instead? Well, my only thing that I would say about virtual actors with Dapper is that you think about Orleans, you think about Akka.net, those things are .NET only, right? When you think about building microservices with Dapper, well, I might be working with folks that aren't using .NET. Maybe they're using Python or Java or Go or some other language, right? In that case, Orleans and Akka aren't going to work for them because they don't speak that language, right? So with this, it kind of gives you, with virtual actors in Dapper, it gives you the option to be able to have like an actor-like programming model on top of like whatever language and whatever operating system you're hosting on. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay. Here's some examples of places that you could go to get stuff and learn about Dapper. I know folks want to know where the code is. If you head over to my GitHub at github.com/Cecil Phillip-Stripe, I do have a Stripe GitHub account other than my personal one because it's work. That's what we do. But definitely make sure you head over there and check out the sample. It is in the Dapper branch of the repo because I have a bad habit of putting multiple things in the same repo. And so I have these different branches with like different versions of the same application. And actually, I think I'll pop that over there and show y'all what it looks like really quick. So if you come over to the repo, and then you can make sure that you check out like there's different branches. There's a Dapper branch, which is the one that you're probably more interested to, and I have some other ones in there that you don't probably need to worry about. But yeah, definitely head over there and check it out. Let me know what you think of the demo. Let me know if y'all have any questions. I'm going to pause for a minute, and hopefully y'all had a good time and learned some cool stuff about Dapper. Don't steal from animals. What does that mean?
I'm not muted.
This was a really good demo, really good show, actually. In 1 hour, you showed us a lot of things. Speaking of which, you did show us your credit card number. We do have a follow-up question on that from the audience, but also personal interest.
Sure.
What is your mother's maiden name and the name of your first pet?
The name of my first pet is Leonardo, and my mother's name, oh my God, I should know my mother's maiden name. After we off the stream, I'll tell you. All right, so let's talk about that credit card. That credit card that was there is a test card. Folks always wonder why it's 4242. There's supposed to be like some Monty Python story behind of why it's 4242. I don't remember exactly why that's the case. But for lots of folks, I think if you use, PayPal and Stripe and whoever, Braintree, you type in 4242, like that is everyone's like, everything is okay test credit card. So you could try that out and, and see. But also if you charge it and, you get to buy some cool stuff on Amazon, then, I take donations as well. So that's
I said I need a Lambo, so I'm hoping.
What's the limit on that card?
I mean, let's try it out and see, man.
So we did have a lot of questions actually, and I guess one of the things, like you showed that list of just all the components in the ecosystem. When you're starting to build your Dapper application, like how do you choose from that menu? It's like being at a restaurant and just having like FOMO, I think, for me.
So I'll answer it this way. Like when I was building stuff in Azure Service Bus, one of the things that I always wished I could do was build offline. You can't do offline Azure Service Bus today. And for a lot of cloud services, you can't, there's no like offline experience for them. And so when I think about it, I think, hey, my company has, I'm going to assume someone in your company is like already provisioned infrastructure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone, maybe it's the developers, but someone's responsible for that. And so as your company has decided to use things, you can be like, okay, hey, this is what we're going to use, but like, you know what, I really don't want to like pull in NuGet packages, and I don't want to, I don't want to have a Redis SDK and a this SDK and a that SDK. Particularly when you think about things like message buses. Some people use multiple message buses. That's a thing. Like companies do that. Mm-hmm. People have multiple databases. That's a real thing. People do that, right? Yeah. I don't want to have like all of these SDKs to support all of those things if I don't need to, right? And then I think that also kind of goes into the conversation of, well, do I need to use Dapr or not, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's also okay for you to use those SDKs. That's fine if there is an implementation specific feature that you want to use that Dapr doesn't provide. I'll give you another example. Azure Service Bus. I worked in Azure, so I'm going to say Azure a lot. I apologize.
Yeah, go for it.
Azure Service Bus supports delayed messaging, right? Like I can schedule a message to be delivered at some point in the future. Dapr doesn't support that today, right? But that might be something that you need to leverage. So if you know, like, this is what you're using for your infrastructure, your company is using, then maybe you should just rely on that SDK, but then you could use Dapr for the other things. Mm-hmm. Because again, the thing with Dapr is that like, you don't have to use all the pieces. You could just use the piece that you want, and then the rest of it, you could just kind of ignore the fact that they're there. You could turn them off, or you could use API scoping and deny them to the process or whatever the case is.
Yeah, Martin actually has a really good follow-up question. I saw him type it.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Martin.
Because you're talking about SDKs and so on, but you also mentioned that it's only a thin wrapper essentially around all of the APIs and services that Dapr provides out of the box. Is there any benefit to using the SDK or working yourself against the APIs directly?
You mean like the Dapr client SDKs? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so particularly for ASP.NET folks, like it does provide like some easier ways to configure Dapr. Like you don't have to work as hard. So as an example, like how do I specify what topic am I subscribing to, right? Generally what you do in Dapr is you'd have to generate like this JSON object and send it over. Whereas if you use the SDK, you could just put some attributes over your method and it'll just kind of figure it out for you, right? And so instead of you having two methods, like one method to subscribe and one method to actually process the queue, I could just have one method with an attribute. And then again, like Dapr will just kind of figure it out. So I think it really just kind of depends on how you like to do things. I personally like to show Dapr like as itself raw without SDKs, because for me, like the whole benefit is the fact that I'm using this thing. I don't have any SDKs, right? Like, so for me, that's the whole point, right? I don't want a Mongo SDK. I don't want a Rabbit SDK. I don't want a, what's that thing called? Google Pub Sub. I don't want anything. I just want to talk HTTP and have stuff work. And so I like to show it like without the SDKs.
Yeah, I think too, for your demo, it's really good to kind of like show that it's not really magic. It's just calling a bunch of endpoints. So that's really cool.
I have another question related to just the calling endpoints. I was wondering, like if you use the client SDK, that's perfectly fine because that's just one SDK, right? Mm-hmm. But I was wondering how much of a lock-in is using Dapr. Like say somewhere in the next couple of years, people stop maintaining Dapr and you want to move out. Is it replacing all of the SDKs, or can you essentially just, if you write the communication between services well, it's essentially just a matter of changing URLs internally?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things I'd say. So Dapr is a CNCF project, and I know that what that means, and it's also a graduated project too. It's not like a sandbox or an incubation. And so what that means is that like if something happens, you know what I mean, like the foundation is responsible for like ensuring like the longevity of it, at least for like a certain period of time until someone takes care of it. So I think from that perspective, there's a little bit of ease in terms of like, okay, this is not going to like disappear tomorrow. This isn't someone's like side project that they're working on the weekends. I'm like, oh, hey, I went on vacation. I can't respond to your issues. My bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that type of thing that's happening. And I would also say like in terms of actually calling the SDKs and the lock-in, again, like it's using HTTP client, at least for .NET, right? And so from that perspective, just write an API and point to something else, right? Like wherever wherever your thing is, it's not like, again, we're not using any non-standard protocols or message formats or anything of the sort. Like it's HTTP and JSON, or it's protobuf and gRPC. Again, like if, you can change the name of your client to like not Dapper anymore and point to like a different endpoint. And that's totally fine.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, a good follow-up question that just kind of to stay on topic. Somebody asked, like, what's the interop story between when you upgrade from one version of Dapper to the next, especially since communication's happening through that sidecar model? Like, can you just expect things to work if you're mixing and matching different sidecar versions? Are there caveats there?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say as that happens to definitely pay attention to the release notes as releases come out. Like, so this is Dapper's 3rd year. I think their version 1.9 just came out like 2-3 weeks ago, give or take. I've only had one instance where something stopped working. And that was only because like they changed the structure of the payload. And then I was like, okay, I'm missing, like I had it to like add an extra property, but like everything else was fine, right? They didn't rename anything. They didn't remove APIs. They didn't change the API format, but like, they just added like an extra property that I was missing. So that's the only time that that's happened to me in the last 3 years. Yeah, I would say just, definitely pay attention to the formats. I haven't had an issue outside of that with like rolling forward. If you look at the payload, if anyone, decides to play around with Dapper and actually look at the payload, there's really not a lot changing here. A lot of the times it's just your data. Right. So if you change your stuff, like it's going to change. I did mention the cloud event stuff. The cloud event stuff is optional. It's on by default, but you could turn it off. So again, if you turn it off, what will happen is, again, you won't get like that envelope, and you'll just get like that raw payload, whatever you send over, XML. Do people still send XML? XML, JSON, whatever it is that you want to send over, right? Like you're just going to get your raw data, right?
Yeah.
And it's yours. So, obviously,
I want to clip you saying, do people still send XML?
See, maybe they do. I'm not shaming anybody. If you use XML, it's fine. Everything is okay. As the fire burns behind our heads.
I mean, at the same time, we're also all using YAML. And speaking of which, there's a lot of YAML involved in Dapper, I think.
There is a lot of YAML, and so the reason that is because it follows like this microservice culture that we have now of being declarative, right, versus programmatic. And so the way that things are specified is like using YAML files that could be versions and source control and all of these types of things versus, and I mean, obviously you could do that with code too, but then now it's that concept of like, what do you call it? Like immutable infrastructure or whatever it is that they say, where, hey, I'm going to apply these changes, and then now the framework is going to do the diffing for me and figure it out. And then now I'm going to get like my desired state, right? Like this is what the world for me should look like. And again, you see it a lot in the Kubernetes world, and Kubernetes is probably like the most popular deployment target for Dapper. There's Azure Container Apps, which is a thing now too. People can use HashiCorp Nomad as well. I don't think there's any direct support for it, but again, like you're just running a process. It's more so about like writing the right HCL, HashiCorp configuration language specification to put it to where you want it to go. But yeah, no, I wouldn't worry so much so about like the YAML, because I feel like YAML is just, I feel like we're just stuck with it. Like it's not going to go anywhere. So,
yeah, so is there like JSON schemas or YAML validation things that could help you write all that YAML, or?
I don't think that there's any YAML validation, and that would be good to have.
Yeah.
Because I remember I was looking for it as I was building that demo, and I'm just like, why isn't this thing working? Like, oh, I missed the property.
I forget if YAML is valid JSON. I think that's the right.
I think
way.
JSON is valid YAML. That's the thing.
Oh man, maybe we should ask the chat and figure it out.
Yeah,
we're professionals, people.
Yeah, like I said, I just go to the GitHub repo and I copy paste the spec, and then I just change the values, right? Because again, like when you think about like those YAML configuration files, it's like things that you write once and you forget about it, unless you need to write like another one, right? But like there are not places inside of your code that are going to churn a lot. You know? Again, unless you're in the habit of changing your databases and your infrastructure a lot. Maybe that's a thing. But like other than that, you write it once, you push it somewhere. A lot of customers usually would put it in like some central place. I don't know, a shared network drive or whatever the case is. So now all the developers just point their instance at that, right? And they pull their configuration from that. Because you might be using Dapr, but it's using your local instance of Mongo, your local instance of Redis, and that's on whatever port and IP on your internal infrastructure. So instead of everyone having copies of that, like I could just point at that shared drive and we all use it. But again, from a developer perspective, like I don't want to have to be like iterating on that too often, right? Like it should just be a thing that's there, and then now I can just focus on like doing the rest of my code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of brings up like another thought I was having, like how do you recommend managing a Dapr solution? Because you're going to have multiple services, you're going to have multiple dependencies. Do you recommend a mono repo approach? Do you recommend repo per service? Like how have you seen people building their Dapr applications?
I mean, I've seen it all, right? I think it really just depends. I'm sorry.
You've seen it all.
It just kind of depends, right? Because so like now this is a higher conversation about like how you architect microservices, right? Like this has nothing to do with Dapr per se.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just more so around like what makes the most sense for your company. Me personally, I'm not a fan of mono repos. I know a lot of folks that love that stuff. I don't like it because it's confusing. And high risk for conflicts and stuff like that. But, some folks do that. Or a lot of folks, they would, I know a lot of companies that have these automation scripts that would check out and, move folders around and do the builds. And, you can kind of rely on your CI/CD to kind of do some of that stuff for you. But yeah, that's one of those things where it kind of just depends on the company, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like, it's hard to know what people's contexts are. So it's hard to make a recommendation without having a clear picture of like what people are trying to solve, right? So I definitely understand where you're coming from there. But yeah, I think that's most of the questions. Martin, any other interesting questions? Or
I think there was one more, and given you come from Azure, maybe that's a good one to end with. Should I move from Azure Functions or cloud-specific functions to using Dapr?
That's a good question. So look at it. So this also has nothing to do with Dapr per se, and this is more so how do I want to build like my microservice application, right? Like, so when you think about serverless things and Azure Functions, you think about, hey, I'm not touching the infrastructure. I'm just writing code and sending it over the fence. And someone else is going to deal with it, right? Like that's how we generally think about serverless things. Versus if you're going to use something like Dapr, or Kubernetes or Docker or anything that's running containers in that sense, like you're controlling where the process is. Like you have to put it somewhere. You have to deploy it and spin it up and do your network configuration and updates and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Now, if the capabilities that your application requires are not something that you can do in a serverless way, and there might be reasons for that, like you want to access the disk. I don't know why you want to do that, but maybe that's the thing. Right? You want to access the disk, or you want to get like certain certain insights about the operating system or the environment that it's running on. Maybe that's something that's important to you. Maybe you want to just run ad hoc executables and those types of things. Like serverless is not really meant for those types of applications, in my opinion. Someone else might tell you different. I'm going to tell you don't do it, right? But versus when you have something like, I don't know, I'm just running Dapr and running containers is like I'm just running an app on my machine, right? Like I control everything. I control the space that it runs in. I control the programming language and the version of the programming language. I can control where it's deployed at, the IP address, the port it runs on. Like I control everything. So now it's a case of how much control do you need or not need, and how much flexibility do you need or not need. And then based on that, you can kind of make a decision about whatever's going to be the best choice for whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, very, very good advice. I guess we ended on the perfect consulting answer, which is it depends.
We should call this entire conference "It Depends."
If you're a professional and you don't say "it depends" 100 times a day, are you really a professional?
And I don't trust you.
That was a great talk. Thank you so much. We've seen people say I'm definitely going to give Dapper a try now on social media. So you definitely convinced some people to check it out.
Yeah, if folks are interested, feel free to again join the Discord. I hang out in there in the .NET channel randomly, or message me on Twitter. And again, make sure you go and check out the demo. And yeah, let me know what you think.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'd always love to have you back. And
Absolutely.
thank you, and have a great day, Cecil.
All right, folks. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Later. Bye.